Today I'm here to do a spoiler-free review of an upcoming horror book that I think a lot of you are going to love, that I adored and I thought deserved its own dedicated review video. So that is Dark Sisters by Kristi DeMeester. This is an author who I have been watching over the years since I fell in love with her debut novel Beneath, which I'll talk more about in this video. But again, I'm going to keep this all spoiler-free, but really talk about why I love this book, a little bit about what it's about, and hopefully help to put it on your radar, your TBR, if it also sounds up your alley. So I am posting this a little bit early just because the end of the year is really nutty when it comes to books coming out and all the end of the year content, but definitely put a reminder to check it out as it comes out or pre-order it, hold it through your library, whatever the case is. But let's talk about this fantastic horror novel. Now, Dark Sisters is a story told over 3 timelines. Primarily, we get the perspective of a woman who is in the 1950s. She is a mother and a wife, and because it is the 1950s, she also is taking on the primary role of taking care of the home and her spouse, as is very much culturally accepted and expected at that point in time. And so at the beginning of the story, you find that while she in many ways loves her role or leans into it, you also find that she has this desire for more, for something different. She's not entirely satisfied, let's say. And within her storyline, she is introduced to a woman who opens her up to more possibilities. The synopsis I read on the back of the book gives away a little bit more details as to what that entails. But again, I always think that less is more. But just know that it's very much that familiar story of a woman who is looking again to expand her version of the universe that is outside of the accepted cultural norms at that time. We also have the perspective of a teenage girl. She is the daughter of the preacher at their church, and so because of that, she's under a lot of scrutiny. And so within the community, people are very much both putting her on a pedestal, and also she deals with a lot of prejudice and judgment and so forth because she's expected to be perfect, and anything she does wrong is very much seen as a public flaw, not just to her but also her family, not just her father but also her mother. And so a lot of her story and her setup is about the aesthetics. So they are again in the church, and the way the story opens, or her story specifically opens, is talking about the fact that Sundays at church are as much about God as they are about putting on a certain perception of yourself. So wearing certain clothes, certain brand labels, Chanel, and very much looking the part of the proper woman going to church. And so again, as you're seeing as I describe the story, it's very much one about the roles and expectations that fall particularly upon young women. And so within her story, the setup is that there is a purity ball that is approaching that she is going to be attending. And so a lot of her story is the lead up towards that, as she is trying to navigate, again, young life, friends, potential interests in other partners, and so forth. And of course, the expectations, the heavy weight of the expectations of her family pressing down on her, and perhaps never feeling like it's enough. As I mentioned, there is a third perspective. So we do have another woman who is primarily revealed through interludes, and really they're just snippets that are told as the story progresses. So I don't want to give away too much from a synopsis perspective, but as you can tell from the general setup of this novel, it is a very familiar story that is done over and over again, that is quite popular right now. And that is a story of women as they are trying to break out of expectations that are put upon them largely by, in many cases, the men and surrounding culture that they are within. There's a lot of commentary around the role that church plays in setting and keeping those expectations and keeping women in their place. And then with that, there's also the larger conversation around female friendship, other female relationships. There is a sapphic aspect to the story that is woven in. And so again, breaking out the norms, not doing the socially acceptable thing. And then of course, because this is a horror supernatural story, there are those elements introduced as well. So this book definitely has a bit of that witchy feel angle to it, which I know a lot of you watching this love. One thing to note is the fact that I, as a reader, am not someone who's normally drawn to witchy stories, or at least I think I like them, but when I go to read them, I realize that they're not necessarily up my alley. So the fact that this story leans so heavily into aspects of that subgenre that is hugely popular right now, but is not normally my subgenre, not normally something that I will give 4 or 5 stars, speaks a lot to how well it is done here. A lot of my love for this book comes from the fact that it is a really good callback to the author's previous work, Beneath. So without rehashing that video too much, that is a story of a young woman growing up in a very strong fundamental community, and so she is dealing with a church where they do snake handling. She gets pulled into that and has a supernatural element to it. I got a chance to speak with the author on a podcast and do a bit of an interview with her, so I very much can see that she writes her opinions, feelings, and values on her sleeve in her books, and that is very much true with what you see in Beneath, which is a very raw, gritty experience of a young woman pushing against a society that is trying to keep her down. She has a follow-up novel that is very much about the experience of women being told to be quiet, sit down, and virtually disappear. And so following along the narrative themes that she likes to write, which of course are very feminist, so going into the book you have to be aware and expect what you're going to get here, is that really angry feminist perspective. And I don't consider myself an angry feminist, but I like how she brings it out because, again, she writes books that are just uncomfortable to read in a way that I really like, because again, she really challenges certain beliefs and pushes against what is socially acceptable and says things that otherwise in other contexts would be things you would just never say. There's something about the way she writes things that just feel like another author couldn't get away with saying what she says. It gives me huge Gillian Flynn vibes. I don't think that she writes the identical stories, but again, if you like really messy female characters who are both flawed and are also trying to fit and work within the confines of their feminine surrounding world and their viewpoint and what they can do with the resources they have, it's really well done. So in general, I would say this is a book that is not necessarily redefining or subverting tropes in the way that if you go into the story expecting what it describes so far, you are going to get a story that will follow that narrative. So I don't want to describe this as a thriller with twists and turns. And while I'm calling this horror, and it does fit under that genre because of where the story goes, it also is the kind of horror that is more the horror of the reality versus, again, a giant monster jumping out of the closet necessarily. There is something very overt and also very subtle in the way that this is all presented, and definitely has, again, more of that supernatural angle to it in the way that you are bringing in women who are finding power within themselves, whether that be in a metaphorical way or perhaps, again, in a more literal way within regards to the story. And so this is one that, again, I would recommend to readers that love great writing, great characters, particularly when I say great characters, characters that are morally complex. So these characters are not necessarily to the darkness of Gillian Flynn, but again, people who have very conflicted parts to them where they are not black and white. Even again with the mother in the 1950s, it's not like you're introduced to a woman who is absolutely hating her life at the beginning of the story, but you see little threads of how she is unsatisfied with the plate or the life that she is given, and she is drawn to looking for something more, and as that slowly unravels. And so you see a nuanced perspective where you understand people's motivation, but it's not done in a way that's so heavy-handed that it just feels like the author is being too overt with the messaging that they're putting through. Certainly the author has some clear perspective that they are going for, and again, this is very much a book that, while I want to recommend to everyone and their dog, I also want to recommend to the right readers. And so I know I always get comments, people saying I don't like female fiction, I don't like books written by women authors, things like that. I'll be honest, this book is not going to be for you. This is one that is fantastic. In the author's debut, I really liked their writing, but it did feel like a debut novel where some of the narrative felt like it could have been reworked or re-edited. The writing, while it was very raw and emotional, and I really felt the author pouring themselves on the page, also felt that way in the way that the writing, again, was less polished. Their follow-up novel, their sophomore novel, was much more polished, but I felt like they really muted a bit of their voice. So Kristi DeMeester's voice in the second story that she wrote, essentially, for me, wasn't strong enough, wasn't really saying everything I wanted her to say. And so this, to me, is the best of both worlds. So it comes back to the gritty and rawness of the first book, but still bringing in the polishedness of a story writer who has, again, published multiple books. Her prose, storytelling, narrative structure, all of that has significantly improved, and it's just great to follow this author through her career. So needless to say, I really recommend, again, Dark Sisters to anyone who loves fierce feminine fiction. If you're looking for more, I also recommend Beneath, which hopefully you can track down in one form or another. I really enjoy this author, and definitely one that I will continue to watch as he puts out more books. Hopefully you give this book a try if it sounds up your alley. Love to hear down below if you've read this author before, or if you're thinking about picking this one up. Again, I know it's not out till until December, and I'm putting this out a little bit earlier than I like, just because again, end of the year is insane when it comes to all the year-end content I want to put out. So I wanted to put this out a little bit early so that it didn't miss getting its own dedicated video. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know what you think. Drop a comment down below, even if just an emoji. If you're new to my channel, hopefully you stick around and subscribe and hit that little notification bell so you don't miss a video from me. If you enjoyed this video, definitely give me a thumbs up, and again, drop that comment. Love to hear what are other types of long form reviews you'd love to see from me in terms of horror content. Do you prefer to see newer releases, upcoming releases like this, or would you love for me to do more deep dives into some of the horror classics that I love, to know more about the why I love them and help to sway you if you haven't read them yet? So let me know what you think. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.